Hey, I gotta tell you about this wild thing that went down at work the other week. I've been working as a professional drone pilot. Not the military kind, though. I fly these high-tech drones for environmental research, mapping out changes in the coastlines up here in Nova Scotia, Canada. The job's kinda out there, but I get to see some crazy remote spots nobody else does. So, this one time, I'm out near Digby, along the Bay of Fundy, and the tides there are nuts. They go up and down like 50 feet twice a day. That day, I'm out there on the rocks, controlling my drone, and everything's as usual. Birds are flying, the drone's buzzing, and the water's doing its thing. Then I see something on the monitor that catches my attention. At first, I think it's a glitch. You know, like when the screen goes all haywire for a sec. But no, this thing's moving, and it's not a seal or a fish. It's like longer, and it's got these spiky ridges. I'm squinting at the screen, trying to make heads or tails of it. And then I look up, and there it is, out in the water, but closer to the shore. This thing is like something out of a movie. It's got these scales, all shiny and dark, and it's swimming against the tide like it's nothing. I'm telling you, I've seen seals, otters, even sharks around here. But this is like a freaking dinosaur or something. A reptile for sure, with claws that look like they could tear through the rocks. It's long, maybe longer than a kayak, and it's got these eyes that are very aware of its surroundings. I'm no cryptozoologist or anything, but I've heard the stories, you know, the ones old fishermen tell about sea serpents and stuff. Never believed them, not until that day. This thing, whatever it was, had this presence. I'm not gonna lie, it freaked me out. I'm there, standing on the rocks with my drone controller, and for a second I'm not sure if I'm safe or not staying there. But I stay. Curiosity, man, it's a killer, isn't it? So, I get the drone to hover closer, real careful not to spook it, or whatever you'd call it. I'm trying to be all quiet, which is stupid, right? It's not like it can hear me with all the waves and wind. But I feel like I should be quiet, like it's a moment or something. The drone's camera's rolling and I'm thinking, this is it. I'm gonna be the guy who gets the shot, the one that goes all viral and stuff. It feels like hours that I'm watching it swim, but it's only minutes really. Then, this thing does something I didn't expect. It doesn't dive down or take off. It just kind of floats there, and then, this is gonna sound nuts. It looks like it's standing up in the water. Not like a person, but it rises, you know. The top part of it gets out of the water, and it's got this long neck and a head that's looking around. Picture Nessie the Loch Ness Monster, that sort of thing. My hands are all sweaty on the controller, and I'm trying not to make any dumb moves with the drone. This creature, it's just scanning the shore like it's looking for something, or maybe someone. And I'm thinking, please don't let it be me it's looking for. Because, let's face it, what would I even do if it started coming my way? No way I could outrun it. Not on these rocks and with the tide coming in like that. But it didn't come toward me. Instead, it just dropped back into the water, slow and easy, like it was trying not to make a splash. I'm standing there, heart going like a drum in my ears, watching the spot where it disappeared, half expecting it to pop back up. But nothing happens. The water's just water again, waves rolling in, and that thing is gone like it was never there. The drone's still recording, and I'm just frozen for a minute, you know? Like my brain can't decide if it's safe to move yet. Eventually I get a grip, reel the drone back in, and pack up my gear. I take a last look around just in case, but it's all clear. I book it back to my truck, and the whole way I'm looking over my shoulder, scanning the waterline. Nothing jumps out, but that feeling of being watched doesn't quite go away. It's only when I'm safely inside the truck, doors locked, that I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands are shaking a bit as I start the engine, and I'm not ashamed to admit I was rattled. The drive back to town is a blur. My mind is racing faster than the truck's wheels. All I can think about is what I saw. The logical part of my brain is trying to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a freakishly large sturgeon or some undiscovered species. But deep down, I know it wasn't anything so mundane. I've seen sturgeons before, and they don't look like that. They don't have eyes that seem to look into you. I get back to my place, and the first thing I do is lock the door. Not that a lock would stop a creature like that, but hey, it makes me feel better. I go straight to the computer, plug in the drone's memory card, and there it is. The footage is clear as day. There's no mistaking what I'm seeing. It's there on the screen, not just in my head. I sit there for a long time, just watching the video over and over. It's hypnotic almost. I'm half expecting the creature to leap out of the screen, but it just keeps doing its slow, eerie dance in the water. I finally snap out of it and start to think about what to do next. Who do I tell? Do I tell anyone at all? The last thing I want is to become some crackpot conspiracy guy. But this is real. For a long time, I don't do anything. I keep the video to myself, go about my business, but the image of that creature haunts me. I have trouble sleeping, keep having dreams, where I'm back on those rocks and it's there. But this time it's not content to just swim away. Sometimes it comes on land, its body morphing, stretching until it towers over me, and I wake up just as it reaches out. The days pass, and the weight of keeping this secret starts to gnaw at me. I think about going to the authorities, but what would I say? Hey, I found a sea monster, wanna see? I can imagine the smirks and eye rolls. Plus, I don't want to risk them taking my footage, and I end up with nothing. Instead, I start hitting the books. Well, the internet. I spend nights deep diving into marine biology forums, cryptozoology blogs, any place that might have answers. I find stories of sightings along the Bay of Fundy going back centuries. Tales of the Digby Dragon, they called it. None of the stories are quite like what I saw, but they're close enough to make me believe I'm not the only one who's encountered this creature. I even reach out to a few posters anonymously, asking if they've seen anything like what I captured. The responses vary from skepticism to outright enthusiasm, but no one has anything concrete. It's all hearsay and blurry photos. Nothing like the HD footage I have sitting on my hard drive. The whole thing feels like a puzzle with half the pieces missing. There's something exhilarating about it, but also isolating. I can't share the biggest discovery of my life with anyone. It's just me and my computer screen and that thing. I keep flying the drone for work, but every time I send it up, I half expect to see the creature again. It never shows up, and I'm not sure if I'm relieved or disappointed. It's a strange feeling, wanting to encounter something that terrifies you. But I guess that's human nature for you. We're drawn to the things we don't understand. And that's where I'm at now. Still got the footage, still got a million questions, and still no idea what to do next. I honestly don't know if I want to release it. My name's Jake. I've been working on a road crew in Louisiana for the past 5 years. It's a tough job, but it keeps me outdoors, and I like that. We were working near the Atchafalaya Basin, which, if you don't know, is this massive swamp area. Think alligators, snakes, and thick, muddy water. It's the kind of place that looks otherworldly, where you'd expect to see some weird stuff, but nothing like what I saw that night. It was getting late, around 9 p.m., and we were finishing up for the day. The sun had already set, and the only light we had available came from our trucks and a couple of floodlights. Most of the crew had left, and it was just me and a couple of other guys packing up. The air was heavy with humidity, like it always is down here, and there was this buzzing sound from all the insects. Typical Louisiana evening. I swear you've got to be from there to love it. So I'm there loading tools into the back of the truck, and I hear this weird noise that didn't belong to the swamp. It wasn't an animal sound, at least not any animal I know of. It was this sort of, I don't know, a scraping noise? Like something dragging itself across the gravel. I figured it was just one of the guys messing around with the guys around him, so I didn't think much of it. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I stood up straight, trying to see where it was coming from. I had to crane my neck all around since the source wasn't obvious. At one point, I had to walk a bit away from the site and look around one of the trucks. That's when I saw it. This thing coming out of the trees. It was maybe about 50 feet away from me, and at first, I thought it was a person, but that wouldn't have made any sense out here. But as it got closer, I realized it was all wrong. This thing, it was pale, like really pale, almost white. It was humanoid, yeah, but its limbs were way too long. Its arms reached almost down to the ground, and it moved in this weird, jerky way. It didn't walk like a person. It kind of shuffled, dragging its feet and arms. The most messed up part was its eyes. They were this bright, reflective, like when a light hits an animal's eyes in the dark. I was standing there staring at this thing, and I swear, it felt like time stopped. It was heading right at me, but looking down at the ground, and I could feel my skin crawl. Like, how did it know to head for me without looking at me? I've seen gators, snakes, all sorts of wild stuff out here, but nothing like this. It was like my brain couldn't fully understand what I was seeing. Then, the thing made a noise. It wasn't loud, but it was this high-pitched whining sound, almost like a whimper. It took a couple more steps towards me, and that's when I heard one of the guys yell out to me from the truck. "Hey Jake, come on! What are you doing just standing there?" His voice kind of snapped me back to reality, but when I turned my head back to where the creature was, it was still there, just closer now, maybe about 30 feet away. Now, I'm not usually the type to get spooked easily. I've been in the thick of the swamp, dealt with wild animals, but this thing, it's hard to explain, but it was like it didn't belong here, like it wasn't just a normal animal or something. The way it moved was unsettling. It didn't walk. It sort of slithered or shifted along, not even leaving tracks on the ground. Its arms, those long, weirdly jointed arms, they swayed side to side as it moved. I remember the skin. It was sickly looking, kind of like it was stretched too tight over its bones. For a second, I thought about running, but my legs wouldn't move, so I had no choice but to just watch this thing. Eventually, the creature stopped moving and just stood there. It now had lifted its head and was staring at me with those eerie red eyes. I felt like it knew me somehow. The air around us felt charged, like right before a storm hits. It was dead silent, except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I could see its chest moving, slow and steady, like it was breathing really carefully, almost the way a sick person would breathe. And then it made a big sighing sound, almost like a huge exhale, turned and walked slowly back in the direction it had come from. It didn't make a sound, not even the brush of leaves. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone like smoke. I stood there for a moment, thinking about it all, but also with an empty head all at the same time. That's when the guy started yelling at me again, asking if I was coming. I lifted my hand to let them know I was on my way, and walked over towards the truck. I didn't say anything about the creature to them, just mumbled something about seeing a deer that looked sick. I knew they wouldn't believe me if I told them the truth. Hell, I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. The rest of the drive back was quiet. I kept looking out the window and into the mirror, back at the swamp, half expecting to see the creature following us. But there was nothing. When I got home, I just laid in bed looking at the ceiling and wondering if anyone else had seen something similar. But I couldn't bring myself to call anyone and tell them my story and ask what they thought. In my head, it was like this creature, whatever it was, didn't exist anywhere but in that swamp, and no one else could possibly know about it. In a wonderful but crazy twist, the next week I was transferred to a different crew, further north. It helped me to sleep at night, even though it was hard to shake the feeling of being vulnerable when outside. Oh well, I just keep plodding along and hoping I get better, and that nothing like this happens to me again. I work as an elevator technician in a massive office building in downtown Toronto, Canada. It's one of those buildings that makes you feel tiny when you look up at it from the street. Working there, you see all sorts of people, and that's one of the things I like about my job. Okay, let's rewind a bit. I'm just your average guy. You know, nothing special about me. I fix elevators for a living. It's a cool job, I guess. Gets me into all sorts of nooks and crannies in the building most people never see. The building I work in, it's old, like really old. It's got this classic vibe, lots of dark wood and brass, but with modern offices set up inside. The kind of place where you wouldn't be surprised to find a hidden door leading to some secret room. So, this one evening, I'm working late. It's not unusual for me. Elevators have this habit of breaking down at the most inconvenient times. I'm there in the elevator shaft, working on some wiring, when I hear this noise. Now I'm used to all sorts of building sounds, but this was like a whisper, but not quite. More like a soft murmur, just on the edge of hearing. I didn't think much of it at first, figured it was just the wind or something. But then, it happened again. And it's not just any sound. It's like someone's talking, but not in a language I recognize. I climb out of the shaft, thinking maybe someone's stuck in one of the offices, or there's a TV left on. I walk down the hallway, and that's when I see it. At the end of the hall, there's this figure. It's hard to describe. It's like looking at a shadow, but it's standing right there in front of you. This figure, it's not moving, just standing there. But here's the thing. It's not like a person. Its shape keeps changing, like it can't decide what it wants to be. One moment it looks kind of human, the next it's something else entirely. I stop dead in my tracks. It's not just the sight of it, but the feeling it gives you. It's like you're being watched, but more intense, like it's looking right into you. I don't know what came over me, but I decide to approach it. Stupid, right? But I had to know what it was. I start walking towards it, slow and steady. But the closer I get, the more this sense of dread builds up inside me. It's like my body's screaming at me to turn around and run, but I keep going. I'm about 10 feet away from it when it finally moves. It's hard to explain, but it's like it shifts, and for a second, it's clearer. I can almost make out features, like a face, but not quite. And then, it makes this sound. It's not loud, but it cuts through everything. It's like a sigh, but there's this sadness in it, this deep, aching sadness. And then the image vaporized and was completely gone. I shook off the weird feelings, telling myself it was just my imagination. I mean, ghosts aren't real, right? But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had seen was real, very real. I decided to head back to the elevator shaft to finish my work. I couldn't just leave it undone since the offices would be open again in the morning. But as I walked back, I noticed the building felt different. Quieter, maybe? It's hard to put into words. It's like the usual background noise of the building had faded away, leaving this heavy silence. As I'm working, I can't help but think about that figure. What was it? Why did it seem so sad? And why did it appear to me? I've worked in this building for years and never experienced anything like this. Once I finished up with the elevator, I packed up my tools and headed to the ground floor. The night security guard, Mike, was at his desk as usual. I've known Mike for years, and he's the kind of guy who's seen it all. So, I decided to tell him about what happened. I expected him to laugh it off, but he didn't. Instead, he looked serious. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked. "Who?" I replied, a bit taken aback. "The lady, the one who haunts this building," he said. "I can see that look in your face." I was freaked out to say the least, and Mike went on to tell me about the building's history. Turns out, it was built on the site of an old mansion that burned down in the 1800s. A family lived there, and there was a tragic accident. A woman in the family died in the fire, and ever since then, there have been stories about her ghost haunting the place. Mike said he'd seen her a few times over the years, always late at night when the building was quiet. He described her the same way I saw her, a shadowy figure that seemed to be in pain, full of sadness. I left the building that night feeling a mix of fear, curiosity, and sympathy, I guess. Sympathy for whatever that spirit was, trapped in this world, unable to move on. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. It was like the experience had opened a door I couldn't close. I found myself researching the history of the building, the fire, the family that lived there. The more I learned, the more I felt drawn to the story of the woman who died in the fire. I started working later and later, hoping to see the figure again. And then, one night, it happened. I was in the same hallway, and there she was, just like before. But this time, I felt less afraid and more determined, I guess. Determined to help her if I could. I approached her slowly, speaking softly. I told her I knew about the fire, about her family. I said I was sorry for what had happened to her. And as I spoke, she seemed to become more solid, more like a real person than a shadow. For a brief moment, our eyes met. There was so much pain in those eyes, but also a kind of gratitude. Then, with another sigh, she faded away. After that second encounter, things started to change for me, both inside and outside of work. I couldn't just go back to my normal routine. The experience with the ghost, it stuck with me. I started spending more time in the building, even when I wasn't working. I'd walk through the halls at night, trying to feel that presence again. But she never appeared. Maybe she was gone for good, or maybe she was just avoiding me. I don't know. During the day, the building was bustling with people, and it felt like any other office building. But at night, it transformed. The silence was deeper, the shadows longer. Sometimes I felt like the building was alive, breathing with a life of its own. I talked to Mike, the security guard, a few more times. He had other stories, not just about the ghost I saw, but other things. Weird noises, doors closing on their own, that kind of stuff. He seemed to believe the building was haunted, not just by the woman from the fire, but by other spirits too. This whole thing, it started to affect me more than I'd like to admit. I'd lie awake at night, thinking about the building, the ghost, the history. It felt like I was being pulled into a world I didn't understand. Then, one night, something happened that I still can't explain. I was in the building, alone as usual. I was walking down one of the upper floor hallways when I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like someone whispering my name. I turned around, but there was no one there. I kept walking, but the whisper followed me. It was like it was coming from the walls, the air, everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I started to feel this sense of dread, like I wasn't supposed to be there, like the building itself was telling me to leave. I picked up my pace, heading for the stairs. But then, right in front of me, a door slammed shut. No wind, no explanation, just a door slamming on its own. That was the last straw for me. I ran down the stairs out of the building and didn't stop until I was back on the street. I stood there panting, looking up at the building. It looked so normal from the outside, just another office building in the city. But I knew it wasn't. There was something wrong with that place, something unnatural. After that night, I decided to take a break from the late nights in the building. I needed some distance, some time to clear my head. I still worked there, but I kept my distance from the ghost, the whispers, all of it. I don't know what to make of all this. Part of me wants to go back, to try and understand what's happening in that building. But another part of me is scared of what I might find, or what might find me. So that's where I'm at right now. Stuck between curiosity and fear, between the known and the unknown. What do you think I should do? Keep investigating, or just let it go and move on with my life? Alright, so let me tell you about this crazy thing that happened to me last winter. I'm not really the type to believe in all that supernatural stuff, but man, this was something else. I was up in northern Minnesota, near Boundary Waters, Canoe area. It's a beautiful place, lots of woods, lakes, the whole deal. I'm a pretty outdoorsy guy. Been hiking and camping my whole life, so I know my way around the woods. I was out there for some solo camping. It was mid-December, and yeah, it was really super cold, but I was well prepared, or so I thought. The first couple of days were great. I did some fishing when the sun was out, and took some long hikes. It was peaceful, really peaceful. Then, on the third night, things got weird. I was in my tent trying to fall asleep when I heard this noise outside. It was this weird kind of howling sound, but not like a wolf or anything. More, I don't know, desperate. It was hard to place. Curiosity got the better of me, so I decided to check it out. I put on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and unzipped my tent. It was a clear night. The moon was bright, and there was snow everywhere, so I could see pretty well even without the flashlight. I started walking towards where I thought the sound was coming from. I was being as quiet as I could, stepping lightly on the snow. I kept going for a few minutes, and then I saw it. Man, even thinking about it now freaks me out. It was standing by a tree, tall and thin, way too thin for a person. Its skin was this weird gray color, almost like it was sick or something. And its eyes, they were just these glowing spots in the dark. I froze. I mean, what do you even do in that situation? Run? Scream? I didn't know. It didn't move either, just stood there staring. And I'm not sure at what. Then it made that sound again, that awful howling sound. It was louder this time, close enough to make my ears hurt. I remember thinking my ears were going to start bleeding or something. That's when I saw it move. This thing, the Wendigo or whatever it was, started closing in on me. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. It was like watching one of those old stop-motion movies, you know? It was terrifying, but I couldn't look away. I backed away slowly, not wanting to turn my back on it. Every step it took, the snow beneath its feet didn't even seem to crunch. It was like it was floating or something. I don't know how to explain it. The thing about it that really got me, though, was the smell. It was this rotten, earthy scent, like damp soil and decay. It filled my nostrils and made me want to gag. I'd never smelled anything like it before, and I hope I never do again. As it got closer, I could see its face more clearly in the moonlight. Its eyes were sunk deep into its skull, and its mouth was filled with these long, sharp teeth, like needles. It looked like it hadn't eaten in ages, all gaunt and starved. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there and get myself in trouble. So I started shouting at it, waving my arms, trying to make myself look bigger. I don't know why I thought that would work, but in the moment, it was all I could think of. To my surprise, it stopped, just stood there tilting its head like it was confused. I kept yelling, throwing in some threats for good measure. I don't think it understood what I was saying, but the noise seemed to bother it. Then it jerked around in this weird way and darted into the trees. The way it moved was so bizarre, just disappearing into the darkness. I didn't waste any time. I bolted back to my tent, grabbed my stuff, and started hiking back to my truck. I didn't care about packing properly or being quiet anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. The whole way back, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing following me, but it never showed up again. When I finally got to my truck, I threw my gear in the back and drove away as fast as I could. I drove straight home. I must have looked a mess when I got back because my roommate immediately was like, "Dude, what happened to you?" I just brushed it off, said I cut the trip short because of the weather. I didn't think he'd believe me if I told him about the Wendigo. But that night, man, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the house made me jump. I kept seeing that thing's face every time I closed my eyes. I was a wreck. The next day, I made a decision. I had to know if what I saw was real or if I was losing my mind. I spent hours on the internet, reading about cryptids, folklore, anything I could find. The Wendigo kept coming up, and the more I read, the more it matched what I saw. It's this creature from Native American folklore, supposed to be this spirit of hunger and the cold. Fits my encounter, right? I even reached out to some forums online, places where people talk about this stuff. Most of the responses were people thinking I was making it up, but a few people took me seriously. One guy even said he had seen something similar in the same area a few years back. He's the one who told me to reach out to you. After a couple of days of this, I was more confused than ever. Part of me wanted to go back to prove to myself I wasn't crazy, but the same part of me was like, no way, man. You're lucky you got out of there. Life went on, but I started avoiding going out into the woods, which was a big deal for me. I even started seeing a therapist because I was having these nightmares about the creature. Months went by, and I slowly started to get over it. I even went camping again, but always with friends and never in the same spot. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though. Every snapped twig, every shadow in the corner of my eye, it made me think it was back. And that's pretty much it. I guess the big takeaway from all of this is that there's stuff out there we don't understand. Things that don't fit into our neat little boxes. I'm more cautious now when I go out into the woods, more respectful of the fact that I'm not always at the top of the food chain. All right, so let me tell you about this one time at work. It's not your usual day at the office kind of story. I work with gas pipes, you see, the kind that run for miles through some of the most remote areas in Oregon, namely the Gas Transmission Northwest Pipeline, or GTN for short. It transports natural gas from Canada to Washington, Oregon, and California. It was a typical foggy morning when I set out to check on a section of pipeline near the border of California. I've been doing this job for about 5 years now. It's quiet, pays well, and I get to be outdoors, which I love. I'm pretty familiar with the area, the dense forests, the way the mist hangs between trees, and the usual sounds of nature. I had reached a particularly isolated stretch. The GPS on my truck was acting up, which happens sometimes out there. I wasn't too worried though. I know these woods like the back of my hand. I parked the truck near a clearing and started my routine walk along the pipeline. The air was crisp and there was this smell like wet earth after rain. It was comforting in a way. As I walked, I noticed something odd. There was this sound. It's hard to explain. It wasn't an animal though. It was a kind of humming, like a fridge but softer. I stopped to listen, thinking maybe it's the pipeline, but this was something else. I followed the sound, veering off my usual path. The trees seemed to close in around me, and the fog was getting thicker. That's when I saw it, or rather them. There were 3 figures standing in a clearing ahead. They were tall, really tall and thin. Their skin, if you could call it that, looked rough like tree bark. It was like they were part of the forest itself. For a moment, I thought they were some weird sculptures or something. But then one of them moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion, and as it did, the humming got louder. I stood there trying to make sense of it. They didn't seem to notice me, or if they did, they didn't care. I realized then that I should probably leave. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But my legs wouldn't move. It's not that I was scared exactly. It was more like I was caught in something, not physically, but like I was stuck in that moment. The one that had moved turned its head towards me. I couldn't see its face, not really. Just these deep eyes and the rest covered in fur. It's just there, existing in a way that's hard to wrap your head around. You'd think in a situation like this, you'd freak out. But for me, it was different. It was more like I was caught in a trance. Now this creature, or whatever it was, starts to move again. But it's not coming towards me. Instead, it's like it's doing something. The other 2 are still, like statues made of bark and shadow. But this one, it's moving its arms in a way that's rhythmic, almost like a dance. And as it moves, the air around it starts to shimmer, like heat waves on a hot road. I'm standing there, trying to make sense of it, and I realize that the air isn't just shimmering, it's changing. The fog around the creature starts to swirl, forming patterns. It's like watching clouds take shape, except it's right there, just a few feet away. These patterns, they're not random. They look like symbols or writing, but not any kind I've ever seen. I'm no stranger to weird stuff in the woods. I've seen bears, I've stumbled across illegal camps, and once, I even found a crashed drone. But that's all normal stuff compared to this. This was different. This was something else entirely. It's not something you expect to see, not even in the most remote parts of Oregon. The creature stops moving, and the symbols hang in the air for a second before fading away. The atmosphere changes then. It's like a pressure has been lifted. The creature and its companions are still there, but that intense feeling, the one that had me rooted to the spot, it's gone. I take a step back, and it's like that's the signal they were waiting for. Without a sound, they start to fade. It's not like they're walking away. They're just becoming less and less there. In a few seconds, they're gone completely, and the fog rolls back in, covering up any sign that they were ever there. I stand there for a moment longer, trying to make sense of what just happened. It feels unreal, like a dream, but I'm wide awake. Finally, I turn and start making my way back to the truck. I'm not running, but I'm not taking my time either. The walk back is a blur. I'm trying to process what I've seen, but my mind can't seem to hold on to it. It's like trying to remember a dream after you've woken up. Bits and pieces stick with me. The shimmering air, the symbols, the way the creature looked at me, but the rest is slipping away. When I get back to the truck, I sit there for a while, just staring at the steering wheel. I'm not scared exactly. It's more like I'm overwhelmed. I've seen something that doesn't fit into the world as I know it, and I don't know what to do with that. Eventually, I start the truck and head back to the office. The drive back is automatic. I don't really remember it. I'm lost in my thoughts. After that encounter, work became different for me. Every time I went out to those remote areas, a part of me was on high alert, half expecting to see those creatures again. But nothing out of the ordinary happened. Life, as they say, went on. One day, about a month after the encounter, I was out in a similar area, not too far from where I had seen those creatures. I was doing my usual checks when I noticed something on the ground. At first, I thought it was just a piece of bark or a fallen branch. But when I looked closer, I realized it was a carving. It was a small piece of wood, smoothed down and etched with symbols. The symbols were similar to the ones I had seen that day. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was finely crafted, the carvings precise and deliberate. I looked around, half expecting to see someone or something watching me. But there was no one, just the quiet of the forest. I pocketed the carving. This couldn't be a coincidence. But what did it mean? The rest of the day, I couldn't focus. My mind kept returning to the carving and what I had seen weeks ago. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. I needed to find out more about what I had seen. I couldn't just pretend it hadn't happened. Oregon has its fair share of stories about strange creatures and unexplained phenomena, but nothing quite fit what I had seen. I looked into natural explanations too. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion or a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The carving was a tangible link to what I had experienced. I kept it with me, a constant reminder that what I had seen was real, at least to me. I even showed it to a few people, trying to pass it off as just an interesting find. But no one could tell me anything about it. To them, it was just a piece of wood with some odd carvings. For me, there was no second encounter, just the quiet forest and the endless miles of pipeline, day after day. And that's where my story ends for now. I still work the same job, and I still walk those same paths, but I do it with a different perspective. So, that's the end of my story. It's not wrapped up with a neat bow. There are no clear answers, just an experience that changed the way I see the world around me. And maybe that's just totally okay. Alright, so I've got this story to share, and it's something I never thought I'd be talking about. You see, I work as a beekeeper outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. It's not your everyday job, I know, but it's what I do. I tend to hives, collect honey, and yeah, get stung more than I'd like to admit. That's the question everyone asks. This happened a few weeks ago when I was out in the fields, checking on some hives we have set up near the edge of the woods. It was just a regular day, sunny but not too hot. Perfect for beekeeping. I was suited up in my gear, smoking the hives to calm the bees before I started inspecting them. So, I'm out there, minding my bees when I start hearing this noise. It was like a heavy thumping kind of sound, but the sound was getting closer, and it didn't have the rhythm of an animal walking. It was more deliberate, heavier. That's when I saw it. This thing, I can't even describe it properly, but it was like a dog, but not really. It was standing on its hind legs, which right away is not normal for any dog I know. This thing was tall, maybe 7 feet or more, covered in dark fur. Its eyes, man, its eyes were the weirdest part. They were this bright, almost glowing yellow, and they were fixed right on me. Now, I've read stuff online about dogmen and all that, but I never really believed it. But there I was, standing maybe 30 yards from this thing. It didn't make any sound, just stood there staring at me. And I'm in my bee suit, smoker in hand, frozen, not with fear, but just in shock, I guess. The weirdest part? It didn't seem aggressive at all. It wasn't growling, wasn't showing its teeth, nothing like that. Its eyes kept holding mine, and I swear it was like it was trying to communicate something. Now, I'm no animal expert, but I've spent enough time around wild animals to know when one's feeling threatened or aggressive. This was different. It was almost like it was as curious about me as I was about it. The thing tilted its head slightly, the way a dog does when it's puzzled. It was a strangely human gesture, and it made this creature seem less like a monster and more like, I don't know, something else. I slowly took a step back, not wanting to startle it or seem like a threat. Its eyes followed my movement, but it didn't advance. Instead, it took a step back as well, mirroring my action. That's when I realized it was mimicking me. This was beyond bizarre. I've read about apes and some smarter animals mimicking human behavior, but a dogman in the Tennessee woods, that was new. The air around us was still, the usual sounds of the forest muted in the background. It was like we were in our own little bubble, just me and this creature. I lowered the smoker I was holding, trying to show that I wasn't a threat. In response, it slowly lowered its arms, which were oddly long and ended in hands, not paws, with fingers that were much too human. I took another step back, and again it mirrored me. There was a strange sense of understanding between us, a mutual recognition that neither of us meant harm. After a few moments, it turned away, giving me one last glance over its shoulder before it disappeared into the forest. Continuing from there, I was left standing alone in the field, the bee smoker hanging limply in my hand. The creature was gone, but the impression it left was profound. I couldn't just pack up and go home like it was any other day. I needed a moment to gather my thoughts, to try and understand what had just happened. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on my work. My mind kept replaying the encounter over and over. I've heard stories from other folks around here about strange creatures in the woods, but I always took them with a grain of salt. Now I wasn't so sure. What I saw wasn't just some misidentified animal. It was something different, something unexplainable. I decided to do a little research when I got home. I spent hours online, reading about dogmen, cryptids, and other unexplained creatures. Most of the accounts were far-fetched, but a few sounded eerily similar to what I experienced. They talked about creatures that walked on two legs, with canine-like features and intelligent eyes. The descriptions varied, but the core elements were the same. The next day, I was hesitant to go back to the hives. Part of me was scared I'd run into the creature again, but another part of me was curious. What if it was still out there? What if it showed up again? I decided to go back, telling myself it was just to check on the bees. But deep down, I knew I was hoping to see the creature again. As I worked, I kept glancing towards the woods, half expecting to see those yellow eyes watching me. But there was nothing, just the normal sounds of the forest and the buzzing of bees. I felt a weird sense of disappointment mixed with relief. A few days passed without any sign of the creature. I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just a bear, and my mind had played tricks on me. But then, something happened that made me believe it was real. I was out in the field, just finishing up with the hives, when I noticed something at the edge of the forest. It wasn't the creature, but it was a footprint, larger than any bear or wolf print. It was distinctly canine, but the size and shape were all wrong for any known animal. And there was something else, a smaller set of prints, like a child's, but with the same canine shape. That's when I knew for sure. What I saw wasn't a one-time occurrence. This creature, whatever it was, lived in these woods, and it wasn't alone. So that's my story. I still work the hives, still go out to the same field near the woods, but I haven't seen the creature since that day. Living in Idaho has its quirks, especially when your dog decides to play hide and seek in the wilderness. That's exactly what I was dealing with a couple of years back. It was fall, and Ponderosa State Park was the stage for this little drama. The place was covered in a thick mist that day, making it feel like I was trying to navigate through a cloud. She was a clever dog, always on the hunt for small game like squirrels and chipmunks. She'd usually keep close, but on that day, she just vanished. It's funny, I'm not the type to get jittery when the sun goes down, but calling out for her in the chill of that night, I was genuinely spooked. The cold was biting, and the mist seemed to swallow sounds, making the world seem further away than it was. I kept moving, pushing through the underbrush, my voice calling for her, only to be returned to me by the eerie silence of the park. We'd been through a lot, she and I, and the thought of losing her out there in the wild hit me harder than I expected. I must have been wandering for hours. My calls were just echoes, with no reply from her. A real sense of dread was settling in, the kind you feel when you think you've lost a true friend. The park was dead silent, amplifying the crunch of my footsteps, making my own sounds feel like a roar in the quiet. It's strange how your mind starts to mess with you in situations like that. The shadows seemed to twist and turn, and every little rustle in the underbrush had me on edge. I was about ready to give up for the night, the cold having seeped into my bones, when I caught wind of something odd. It was a noise, faint, but it was creeping closer. Standing there in the cold, every hair on my body stood on end as it sounded like whispers. My name carried on the wind. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me, an eerie, almost inhuman hiss that seemed too curious to ignore. Could it be my dog somehow making those sounds? Or was it something else, something stranger? There was a part of me, that little voice of reason, that screamed I should turn back, but the mystery of that sound pulled me deeper into the park's embrace. The trees were packed tight, their branches reaching down like hands. The wind cut through the mist, a cold reminder of the night's presence. As I pressed on, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm in my chest. Something was definitely not right. The air was tainted with a foul scent, like the aftermath of a fire, acrid and strong. My mouth was as dry as the autumn leaves that crunched underfoot, and my mind was racing with possibilities of what could produce such a disconcerting sound. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, I continued until a figure materialized in the fog. The whispers seemed to grow in intensity, a cacophony of hushed tones that seemed to know me, to call to me. It stood there in a moonlit clearing, a shape shrouded in mystery. Then, a gust of icy wind slammed into me, a harsh slap from the unseen hand of the night. I stood there frozen, not just by the cold but by confusion and a deep-seated fear. The figure was just a silhouette, its features indiscernible, a dark shape painted against the night. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but it was like trying to read smoke. It was one of those moments where your gut is screaming at you that something is off, but curiosity chains your feet to the ground. I could feel the cold seeping through every layer I had on, a cold that felt like it was coming from inside rather than out. So there I was, standing in a moonlit clearing, confronted by this figure that seemed as still as a statue. The whispers kept swirling around, a storm of hushed voices that felt like they were closing in on me. And yet, the figure didn't move. It was as if the world had hit the pause button, leaving me in this shadowy form in a frozen tableau. I remember thinking, what am I doing here? Is this really happening? Or has the fear and the cold conjured up a phantom from the fog? I'd come out here looking for my dog, and now I found myself face to face with something I couldn't even begin to explain. My breath misted in the air, joining the fog as if it was trying to escape the scene before me. The stillness was suffocating, every instinct telling me to run, but my feet might as well have been rooted to the ground. The figure, that whispering enigma, just waited. For what, I didn't know. My name continued to be whispered, an eerie chant that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere. I had to make a choice, to step forward, confront this bizarre whisperer in the mist, or to turn and run, to leave the mystery unsolved but perhaps keep a grip on my sanity. What happened next, well, that's a story for another day. But let me tell you, the woods of Idaho hold more secrets than you might think, and some of them, they whisper your name. As the whispers grew louder, the fog started chilling me to the bone. I trudged closer to the lakeshore, my heart pounding in my chest. The air was laced with a strange scent, a mix of sulfur and burnt matches, making me wrinkle my nose. Then, out of the thick mist, a figure by the shores of Payette Lake started to emerge. I froze. The shape was strange and intimidating, constantly changing size as if the fog were a curtain it playfully hid behind. One moment it appeared small and hunched, and in the blink of an eye, it transformed into a towering, ominous presence. It had these curves on its head, like horns, and what seemed to be wings unfurling in the shadows. I couldn't see its face, but two glowing red spots pierced the darkness, fixating on me. The whispers turned into a roar in my ears, and beneath them, there were these strange, almost musical tones. It was downright spooky. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of there as fast as I could. And finally, my feet started to move, almost slipping on the wet grass as I turned to flee. I was in full panic mode, running, tripping, and crashing through the undergrowth. Branches seemed to grab at me, trying to hold me back. But those glowing eyes, they never left me. They were burned into my memory. I don't know how far I ran, but the whispers and the cold wind started to fade, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest coming to life at night. I was panting, heart thumping, when I suddenly heard a familiar bark. My head snapped up. There was movement in the bushes ahead, and then, like a miracle, out came my dog, bounding towards me, her tail wagging as if this was all some great adventure. Relief flooded through me, and I dropped to my knees as she leapt into my arms, licking my face. I held her tight, my mind still reeling from the fear and the relief. The figure, those eyes, the whispers, they all faded into the back of my mind. I didn't care what it was anymore. I had my dog back, and that was all that mattered. We made our way back to the car, the park's eerie stillness now filled with the comforting sound of my dog's panting and the jingle of her collar. As we left Ponderosa State Park behind, I couldn't help but feel like we were leaving something sinister in the fog. It was as if we were walking out of a nightmare and back into reality. In the days that followed, I'd look out the window into the dark, half expecting to see those red eyes or hear the whispers on the wind. But all I heard was the rustling of leaves, and all I saw was the peaceful night. People talk about the park, tell stories, and speculate about that night. But to me, it's just the place where I almost lost my best friend, and then, against all odds, found her again. I learned something important out there in the fog. The wilderness is full of mysteries, and sometimes, the most terrifying experiences can lead to the greatest relief. I never went back to Ponderosa State Park at night again, but sometimes I think about that night. I hug my dog a little tighter and remind myself how lucky we are to have made it back home.